I'd like to kind of rearrange the order that we're going to do this in. We have Dr. Reamer here from the Sea Life Center, and she has to be back there in a certain amount of time. So I think we'll go ahead and start with her and then move on down the list. So Tara, you can go to this one or that one, I think, whichever one.
Yeah. You can sit at the table if you want.
And thanks for taking the time to come in and talk to us about this.
Sure. I'm not used to be called Dr. Reamer, so.
I know.
Thank you, Ms. Holmdahl. Or Chairwoman.
So, yeah, just go ahead. This is the first of our, the beginning of our conversation with different people in the community talking about barriers to employment in their specific industry or sector here in Seward. So, Tara.
Great. Well, thanks for the invitation. I talked briefly to Bruce a few weeks ago about it, and I said, you mean barriers, you mean housing? Are there any other barriers? Yeah, of course, recruiting people to a town at the end of the road in Alaska has always been what it is, right? And I think that I moved here 18 years ago in the middle of the summer, and although I was starting in Fairbanks, so it wasn't as challenging. I kind of knew a little bit, but finding a house housing was interesting, but it's different now, and I think that what we're seeing is, in terms of recruiting and retaining employees in this town, it's all about housing. And I've got some specific data points that I wanted to run through, and just to give you some examples. We generally have about 70 year-round employees. Of course, we add seasonals, and I'm not even going to bother talking about seasonal housing, really, because it's its own thing, right? That really, it's a problem, but we've always had seasonal challenges. What we're having problems now is we're having people accept offers and then turn them down because they can't find housing. And the other thing that I'm seeing is that businesses are starting to do what I call hoard housing. And I've got a list of 4 businesses, and I'm not picking on anyone, it's just things I've heard. We have always used AvTech housing for our summer interns, and what we've been able to do is, when we have full-time employees coming over the summer, get additional housing through them to get people through to the end of the season so that they can find housing. Well, my understanding is they have 5 faculty in their housing now, which means that we don't know. Normally their housing is pretty open in the summer because it's between their school terms. So they're having to use it for their full-time people, and hopefully you'll be talking to them as well and hear that. But that's actually impacting us. The fact that their housing problems are pushing us out of what we have used traditionally. And that's been our summer seasonal intern housing option. And the university, we also used to get apartments to the university, and we've done that for years. They're no longer sharing. They are keeping it for themselves. And I've heard just through the grapevine that Providence is doing some similar things, so if they're not already on your list, you should be talking with them. And then an apartment that one of our former employees was in and I'm not going to mention the name because it's a smaller business, but they decided to use it for their own purposes instead of renting it out as a regular rental. Normally, our staff tend to pass housing down. Someone moves out, someone else moves in, but even that's not always working. So we have 2 manager or higher level people right now in temporary housing over the winter that are hoping to get full-time housing. And it's what I was told by one of them, it was the most difficult part of accepting the position here. And I'll even say our Chief Science and Education Officer, our one of our top 3 positions at the Sea Life Center. And it was difficult to find seasonal, even off-season housing, and then finding something long-term is definitely a stressor. And so we've got 2 people like that right now that we know are really looking for something year-round. In terms of people who've turned down offers, and this is all just in the past year. We have an IT position that's been open for like 2 years. We've had multiple people turn it down due to housing. The most recent was last March. And there have been at least 2 people that have turned a position down in our IT department, and we just have 2 people in our IT department. We had an aquarium position open last summer. We had 2 people turn down offers because they could not find housing. We had an education position open last summer. We had 2 people turn down offers because they could not find housing. So what we're finding is the only people that we're able to get are those people who are not risk averse, who are willing to come into a situation, into some really uncomfortable housing situation and try to make it work. And these are people at all levels. This is not entry-level positions only, senior positions only, middle, it's everything across the board. We had 6 different situations last summer, kind of the end of the summer going into the fall, where we had people in really temporary housing last summer until they could get into something in the fall. One employee was living in his pickup. 2 people were in an RV until October. We had 2 people that we were able to put into AppTech until they could get something a little more. We had one person who said she and her kids stayed 5 weeks with a friend and then camped for 7 weeks until finding anything. So it limits your recruitment pool to people who have, and what we're seeing is it's people who have been here before. So some of the people that we've hired are people that have come back. Maybe they were an intern here, maybe they used to live in Seward, or people that just get lucky. I sent out an email 2 hours ago to our staff and saying, who has tried to buy a house within the last 5 years? Now this is just the people who were able to respond to me over about a 2-hour period of time today, right? 10 people told me that they had been working on trying to buy a house over the past, I think all of them were in the past 2 years. Some of them haven't succeeded. Everyone, it took them at least 9 months, some people 2 years, some people still looking. And that's buying houses. That's people that are already here looking to buy. So, and I think that it definitely affects retention of employees. Like if someone buys a house, they're more committed to the community, right? They're less likely to leave. And so when we have that many people, I was pleased to see that many people had actually been successful. Most of them had been successful in getting something, but a lot of it was, it never hit the market. I knew someone who knew someone, right? You all know this, right? This is nothing new, but I wanted to be able to give you some actual data points for what we're seeing. And we do have, I would say that what we're seeing is that in general, younger people are more likely to take the risk with housing than people mid-career or more advanced. And so it gets to be a bigger problem when you're hiring at the manager and above level. But some of these positions are more, are other positions as well, lower level positions that people have turned them down and they're saying they can't find housing. Seasonal is a whole nother issue, and I think that, to me, the community concern needs to be year-round housing, because seasonal's always been an issue, and businesses figure out a way of dealing with it, and we have to figure out a way of dealing with it. So that's kind of my notes and what I had. Happy to answer questions. I'm not in a huge rush to get back. I've got plenty of time. I just didn't want to be the very end of the agenda.
Right. Thanks for all of that. It's really helpful. Does anybody have any questions?
Are you finding it difficult to, let's take housing out of the talk. Are you finding it difficult to find people that are applying for jobs in general?
We're seeing what probably all of the United States is seeing in terms of, fewer candidates for jobs. But in our field, I don't think that I would say we've got 2 types of positions at the center. We've got the types of positions that everyone's got, and then we've got the specialty positions that are in animal care, veterinary care, that type of a thing. We're not seeing that in the animal care positions necessarily, which is Alaska is a cool place to come when you're in the industry, right? The zoo and aquarium industry. Everything else we're seeing that in terms of, we actually got, I would say there is a little bit of, in the people that are in the industry, an interest in coming to Alaska because they perceive it as safer or different, or they're looking for something new, right? And so, but we've also seen a lot of those people turn down things because of housing, or we're scraping by getting them here, right? Like, you know, our HR manager heard about someone that their landlord had another place, and so she called and she hooked this person up with it, and our new mammal curator will be here in a few weeks. Thank goodness. But I'd say with facility staff, with security staff, we haven't had any finance positions open. Those we're definitely seeing what everyone else is seeing.
Has the Sea Life Center ever penciled out what it would cost if you were to build housing for your people?
Fairly long time ago, when we had the lot across the street from us, which we recently sold, we looked at potentially putting something there that would have some staff housing. The piece that we'd rather not do is maintain it. We would rather rent. As a business, it makes more sense. We don't have housekeeping staff. We don't, like, yeah, we do have facility staff, but the amount of, we'd rather rent. And we currently are renting for our off-season interns. We have, I believe, 2 apartments from Seward Properties right now that we have for the off-season, which works great for us. So, you know, one of the things we'd love to do is rent year-round so that we could have places to put people. It's just right now that's not even available, right?
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Reimer. I'll tell you, Matt, thank you. I certainly understand the housing is a major issue and maybe the most significant, but what we saw when we, the community, supported the development of the Sea Life Center was a couple things. One was jobs for local people. And at that time, there wasn't full employment in town. Also, that it would draw in a class of workers, if you will, a semi-professional group, which were considered to be at an income level where they could support growth in the community. What was considered at that time was to attract that caliber of people was a whole community approach. Yeah, coming to Alaska is an adventure, but are there going to be places to exercise, walk your dog, to recreate? Do you feel that we have those things in place, or have we missed a step in the development of those things?
So I think as a community, if you've got a person, so as I said before, we kind of have, when we recruit, it's kind of 2 different types of recruitment. There's people in the industry, which we're not necessarily going to hire local, right? People don't have experience training marine mammals or working with birds always in the state. You know, we do sometimes get some folks, but so that's more of a nationwide recruitment, and I think people look at this place and look at Seward as a really interesting place to come to. It's a positive. And the location, people aren't, like, if they're into it for the adventure, the other pieces, I don't see them as necessarily negatives. I don't think that they're saying, where's the rec center? Great, it would be great if there was more stuff, but I don't think they're saying, where's the shopping? I don't think they're saying, I don't think that's a concern. I think that when we're looking for people to fill positions that there aren't Alaskans available to fill, the people that you get interested that look at it, there aren't necessarily other things that are missing in Seward that I can think of. As a general, like for healthcare, you sometimes get healthcare issues, right? You sometimes have people that are like, you mean I can't have a baby in town? We have lost staff over the years that wanted to start a family that were not comfortable doing that, but it's not as consistent of a refrain as the housing, right? I can only think of one person who literally moved out of Seward because they weren't going to be able to have a baby here and they were nervous about starting a family. Schools, occasionally you'll hear of people that want something a little bit different for their kids on schools. But I don't hear that consistently, and, but from our staff, right? And I think that we've got some staff that, as you said, a lot of our positions, especially those ones we're recruiting externally, our animal care positions require a bachelor's degree. Now, the truth is, what they do is not necessarily requiring of it, but there's so many people that want to do those jobs that it's easy to put that degree. So we've got a group that's educated. You know, we've got a lot of people, even former employees, who've stayed here and raised families and moved on to other places, right? When we had the memorial service for Richard Hawking, it was amazing the people that came back that used to work at the Sea Life Center, moved to Seward for the Sea Life Center, who are still here working in different positions. So I don't get the consistent refrain from anything but housing.
So these people that you're hiring, are they typically like a whole family that ends up coming? Or is it just an individual or an individual and a spouse? Because I think that would influence the complaints, right?
So the people that, I'm just looking at the emails for the people who wrote to me today that they had actually bought a house. Many of them are relatively new staff. I'd say a good chunk of them actually recently got married, young couples without kids, or, and I'm just kind of looking, or not necessarily so young couples, but a lot of people without kids, singles of all ages. I'm not seeing a lot of people on this list with families, and that may be because those are the people who turned us down and never actually got here, right?
That's what I'm trying to drill
Yeah.
into, because my sense of it is that an individual person or even a young couple could probably deal with the lack of everything else besides housing.
Right.
But, you know, we tried to go out to eat yesterday, and it was very slim pickings. And I mean, even just that can be something that is annoying to people if they're trying to live here, because you don't always want to cook at home every day, 3 meals
Right.
a day, you know.
Yeah, and I would say just looking at those names and the people that I've got on this list of people who have come into temporary housing,
It's not
very few of
families.
these people have kids. The one who camped for 7 weeks.
Right.
But in that case, it was wanting to move back to Seward, right? The person was committed to coming to Seward and was willing to go through that. But I'm going single, newly married, an older couple that wouldn't have kids at home. Single, there's the one that was camping, single, a couple without kids.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's the families, we're not, and we used to recruit more people like that. But at this point, it's too risky. It's just, you end up with the people who are willing to take the risk.
So the question I have for you is, on those non-animal related jobs, your front desk or the shop or whatever, how many, when those positions come open, how often do you have Seward-based applicants? Do you have any idea?
We really push for them because we'd prefer to hire locally for positions where we can. So we had a bunch of facilities and security positions that have come up over the last few years. Most of them have been filled with people in town. Some of them, people who came here seasonally, and then we were able to roll. That's our favorite thing for positions like that. People that come seasonally, and then you can rope them into a full-time position in the fall when their seasonal position ends. I'd say that we rarely get people coming from out of Seward for positions like that. And those are the ones we've had fewer applications for in general. We actually did, and I think a lot of people were doing this, we did signing bonuses, we did finder's fees for our staff last year to try to get some of these positions filled. And so it was mostly word of mouth and people in Seward.
Okay.
And then they also have housing, right? So that's
Right.
becomes not as big of a deal.
Yeah, this is, I'm not exactly sure how to frame this question in a good way, but cost of housing. And we're in such a volatile market right now that a house they bought for, you know, is double the price just from a couple of years ago. I hear about bidding wars for houses and et cetera, but when I was coming up, we had a rule of thumb about housing costs versus your income. And it used to be 25% or 20%, and I think it's higher than that now. So using that sort of a formula in your group, what would be an acceptable housing cost? And I know, I'm not asking you to rate mortgages or long-term loans or anything like that, but if someone could spend $1,500 a month or $2,000 a month, just a rough idea, where do you think people are looking for housing costs?
You know, I don't have good information on that. I can find out. My feeling is that it's not as much. There are prices that have been driven high because there's lack of supply, right? There's people that are charging outrageous prices. I think more right now it's people just can't find anything. It's not that, because at one point we were having a conversation with the board, and when a board member asked, well, do we need to adjust wages? And I said, it's not that people aren't making enough to afford housing. There isn't anything out there. And I'm seeing most of the people who bought houses are not, that responded to me this morning, not management level. And these are people that have finally found places, and they're not, so I can find out a little bit in terms of what people expect to pay, but I really, I've owned for 18 years in this town, so I don't know a whole lot about rental.
It's hard to stay current with that. Where I'm going with that, Tara, is that ultimately we're going to be talking to builders and developers. And to get housing in an affordable range, there's no point in building $3,000 a month units if nobody can afford them.
Right.
And it may be that with building costs, we're going to have to suggest things that come into a range of affordability.
Yeah.
In your industry, you have people with degrees who typically should be making a decent wage. We're going to be talking to other people that are slamming fish, that are not going to be in that same high mortgage rate. So that's the only reason I asked the question, and it's one that I think I'm going to ask everybody a little bit to evaluate. Thank you.
Any other questions for Tara? Thanks, it's been
Thank
really
you so
valuable
much.
information. We really appreciate you taking the time to come in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tara.
Great to be here.
Be careful out there.
Yeah, it's warm enough. Okay, so let's move from that on to this discussion of collaborating with the chamber. I see they happen to be here. So in our packets we have this thing from the sewer chamber. Do you want to kind of go over this?
Yeah, for sure. So I was in task with working with you guys on this issue. I called a few dozen of our members and had some conversations with them. Just going off the top of my head, I figured a individual interview survey was a more effective way to get this information instead of a broad blanket survey, since those can tend to be a little bit biased towards the people who click and open. So I did more of an individual survey of I think 18 members, just in different industries, and from that took some of the frequently mentioned problems and a few quotes, and just tried to make it as easy to digest as possible. And obviously, going off of the last conversation we were having, housing is a huge issue, but I also heard a lot of other supporting details that were affecting barriers to business and quality of life. Real estate and space of finding a place to house a business has been an issue outside of employee housing. If you want to open a store, finding a storefront can be difficult. Sewer seasonality, and that was one that I heard a lot from different businesses, specifically retail and restaurant businesses. If one restaurant is open, they'll be busy, but there's nobody else to keep and attract people to go out all year long. If one retail store is open, that's great, but there's nobody walking around the downtown going out to dinner or lunch to go in. So a big issue is opening and starting a business knowing that you'll only have 3 to 4 months. And a refrain I often heard was, yes, we started our business with the hope of being year-round, but it's just not feasible. It's also it seems like it's one of those situations where it's either you don't do it or everybody does it. So there's definitely a lot to be said for the seasonality. And like Linda was saying before, I think I've personally felt it more so this winter than any other, without being able to go out to eat anywhere besides the breeze, but I do love the breeze. An interesting one that I heard was parking and parking enforcement. There's been a really big growth and interest in food trucks, and 2 food trucks mentioned that often they would go to the spot that is set aside for them, and it would be full of visitor parking, and nobody would come and enforce it, and he would, one of them would go into the bars and say, whose car is that? I need you to move, I need to make money. So that was an interesting one that I had never thought of, and putting myself in that food vendor shoe, that would be very annoying. Freight costs and times for some of the larger and more mechanical based businesses are an issue faced. There's a quote down at the bottom of the document that says, freight costs and times are big issues. It takes 2 days longer and it's more expensive, causing a lag and a lack of revenue if you're waiting on a part. Boats needs to stay running, hotels need to keep operating, because if one part goes out, that revenue is lost until the freight can get up here. And that's definitely an issue that we've seen in the boating industry, where if you have tours set for a month and a part goes out and you can't get it for a week, that's a week worth of revenue, a week worth of employee salaries and wages, and a lot lost there. And then an old tried and true barrier to business is the high utility bills. We've heard it again and again, but it's definitely something that people face, especially thinking about keeping a restaurant open year-round, or starting a business and factoring those high utility costs in, or just generally choosing a business that may have a higher utility cost than others. And then lack of employee housing. We can go on about that forever. And then employee retention. That's something that people have been struggling with, is having employees come up and stay up, or start to work and stay working. And then within that, you see the local employees finding better opportunities in town, so working within town and navigating all of the open positions in town until they find the one that's right for them, because they do have the housing, they do have a steady and happy life in town, so they can hop around and find the job that works for them, which kind of impacts employee retention as well. So if you look at some of those quotes at the bottom, the city is easy to work with, though. I kept asking me, like, do you have any troubles with permitting or anything like that? And I said, nope, everybody said the city is very easy to work with permitting and things along those lines. So kudos on that. Just in general, though, from the overall conversations that I was having, it seems that, and I will preface this by saying it's probably biased because we were in the middle of a slow winter, but it seems like everybody's biggest concern is what Bruce was referring to earlier, is just quality of life in the winter. Hiring year-round employees and creating a business that operates year-round is difficult if the quality of life year-round isn't up to par. And that's something that I heard time and time again, of specifically the restaurant front. We're not going to be able to open other businesses and attract year-round employers and have that business area grow if there's nothing to do in the winter. So that was the big refrain I heard, with the caveat that it might be biased because right now there isn't anything to do. And it was a bad weather week that I called everybody.
A question I have, just recently while I was traveling, I was over in Hawaii, and watching commercials there, both Utah and Montana, I saw a lot of ads in Hawaii for winter activities, like come to Park City, and it showed a family cross-country skiing. What efforts has the chamber done, have been gone for a little while, or are in place to try to market us as a winter recreational destination? You know, we have all those snow machiners who snow machine a mile 14 and up Primrose, and maybe efforts to draw them in to come have dinner. Is there a ad campaign geared toward?
Yeah, so we have been incorporating winter into our ads for the past few years. The big step that we took was adding a winter section to both our website and the visitor guide. So it's definitely something that we're excited about doing and bringing people here in the winter. It's personally my favorite season. But on the flip side of that, when we do get visitors into town, into the visitor center, a lot of them are lost. We had multiple people calling over the January New Year's weekend where we set up the fireworks, and they were saying, where can we make a dinner reservation? What can we do the day after? And we had very few answers for them, not because of lack of trying, but because of lack of resources. We're lucky Adventure 60 and Rick has started doing tours out to the national park over the course of the winter using a snowcat, but besides that, there aren't many options for someone who's traveling from out of state to be able to go and recreate in the snow. If they're traveling from Anchorage, that's great, and they have their snow machine, and they'll probably come in for dinner in town, and there's ways that we've been marketing towards them via Facebook and different social medias, but for somebody coming up from California for a winter vacation to Seward, there are very few things for them to do here because we don't have a place to rent skis. We don't have access to the national park. It's basically just Rick and Bixler kind of serving those people. And we have been seeing a lot of people who add us as a destination when they come up for the Northern Lights tours. A lot of people are saying, hey, we were in Fairbanks, Chena, and now everybody said Seward's the best, so we have to come down here. I'm like, cool. Go to the Sea Life Center.
Bring your ice creams.
Yeah, and then unfortunately the Sea Life Center has been closed 2 days a week, so those people who visit on, I think, Mondays and Tuesdays, it's been pretty tough. So from the tourism standpoint, we love to market winter in Seward and want to make that more robust and less seasonal, but not a lot of people are traveling up here with skis in tow or with the ability. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
Yes, please.
Bruce?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I enjoy your enthusiasm. I'm going to start by saying, I don't characterize Seward as being dead in the winter at all.
Yeah.
I came to Seward and it was a lot quieter than it is now, and it was still very lively. But it doesn't have some of the things that we are talking about. Our building downtown does have year-round businesses, and we deliberately keep our rent a place positioned to encourage them to stay open year-round. And we've seen the stagnification of Seward, where a lot of businesses close. They only need that 90 days, and that's a problem. I'd like to talk a little bit specifically about how we're going to collaborate, because I'm probably one of the few members on this board that is not a chamber member. We have a statewide business, and we've deliberately not joined the chamber.
Oh, no.
Nonetheless, we support the chamber's activity.
Yeah.
Okay? But and to some degree, I've been benefited by that because this board has been criticized by being many chamber members when chamber activities came up, and I could speak in favor of the chamber. So that said, I think there's a benefit to having individual people come to this board and talk. Gathering the information, as you've done, I think is also very valuable. Presenting it in personal interviews. The result, to take it to the council eventually, is to have a strong movement of the whole community. And that means people stepping up, putting their name in the minutes of the meeting. So we're going to encourage that, and we hope that you can ride along with that. I hope you can ride along with that and suggest more participants. I think there's a limit to how many of these meetings we can have. I envisioned quite a few actually, with Tara kicking it off. That's great. But the idea of things to do in the winter, I think you guys do a good job of that. I mean, I just came back from Fairbanks last weekend, or whenever, weekend, and there was a nonstop stream of traffic coming from the dive in the water. So I think you got a tremendous winter activity, and how to include restaurants that don't want to be open more than 90 days a year to stay open. I don't know, there's a way to do it.
Yeah.
But there are still outdoor recreation opportunities that Seward has, tremendous activities. And you can look on Facebook at our mayor, who is on the top of these mountains
Yeah.
almost every weekend with a group of people. So there's no lack of things to do around here. I'm a motorhead. You know, I love the opportunity to do all the things that can be done with an airplane or a boat or a car, or snow machine.
Yeah.
And that's all here.
Yeah, I like the use of the word stagnant versus dead. I agree. Seward isn't dead in the winter. I ski and run and play lots and lots of board games, so I stay pretty active in that realm. But I would also argue that for those types of families and situations, that's something that has been lacking. There's, especially since the outset of COVID, without in-person events for people to bring their children to in those younger years before they go to school and have that kind of connection. I think that there's a but a large group of individuals and families who, I think somebody had mentioned it earlier, but aren't getting that type of resources to make this the place where they want to start their family and have a business. Because a 4-year-old, no matter how much I love them, I will not carry them on my back to the top of Mount Marathon. And there needs to be some sort of balance there so that it's not just outdoor recreation. The outdoor recreation is great to bring in tourists, but I can't go running and climbing a mountain every day. I need something to do on my off day. This sounds like me just pleading to you, but I think that's more of a general vibe for across the board. So yes, we have amazing outdoor recreation. And anything that the chamber can do to help facilitate creating businesses and keeping families and individuals in town and expanding on all of these issues that we all recognize as issues, but kind of trying to figure out the ways that we can work towards making them less issues and making Seward a better place to live.
So I agree with you. You know, there used to be a bowling alley right down the street. It's no longer there. And AvTech right now is pretty sketchy for adult activities. I know a lot of people would love to play whatever it is they do in there, basketball or racquetball, and that's sort of iffy. I know that the COVID has affected a lot of that, but how do you see the Seward Parks and Rec fit into this at all?
Yeah, I mean, the Seward Parks and Rec has done a great job of keeping people engaged at a certain level, but there's also the fact that I'm on their newsletter and I still miss things. You know, I just found out the other day that they rent skates and snowshoes, and I got super excited. And I would argue that I'm a more informed person in town. So I think publicity for the Parks and Rec is a big issue, and getting what they're doing out there to people is something that we would love to help out with as well. That's part of our mission, is to make this a great place to live, and if getting the message about Parks and Rec and what they're doing out there is a way that we can do that, that would be wonderful. But yeah, I feel like I miss everything that they're doing, or I hear people saying, oh, I didn't even realize that they were grooming 2 lakes until it was too late. And then we got like an 8-inch of dump snow, so. But bringing that back to kind of how we can help create businesses and stop the barriers to business, I think solving those issues in themselves will make this a better place to live, and therefore a better place to start businesses. But then that housing and utility issue, I think, is still, and real estate space is still the biggest hurdle to overcome. Because you can live here I've lived here for a while now, and I don't have a house. I'm part of I would like to buy one eventually, but it just hasn't been right. So, yeah, I think that's definitely the larger issue at hand.
Specific question.
Yeah.
Does the chamber have a relation with AGC, Associated General Contractors?
Not that I'm aware of, but I am new to this role, so there may be one deep in the emails. But no.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
I have a last question.
Yeah.
I think back to when I first moved here, which was over 20 years ago. And in the dead of winter, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 6 restaurants that were open all the time. Harbor Dinner Club, Christo's, Apollo, Breeze, Thorns, and Marina were all, you didn't have to check on Facebook to see if they were open. I mean, you just, so what I wonder about is because the lack of this is not just COVID. There's something else within the city or within society or something that's causing a shrinking.
I'm curious if this year it's especially noticeable because a lot of businesses and restaurants made more money this past winter or this past summer than they were expecting, have that extra money in their back pocket and are taking some months to do much needed renovations. So that is what I'm hoping is the cause of this winter being a harsh one. I know of the places that are closed that are usually open year round, a handful of them are just doing renovations this year.
I think you've hit a large part of the problem right on the head on that last statement or two. I have an old classmate from college, doctor of chemical engineering, who said that most things in society are the direct result of economics. We have, and in our case, it is economics in one other thing. It's called Seward. Seward is a destination, town, port, world class. We have a national park out our back door. We have world class fishing, a beautiful port, a clean town, surrounded by this, and we all promote it and advertise it. And people with huge amounts of discretionary money want a part of it in the summer, so they come and they force rental housing or housing that's on the real estate market to be overpriced because they come in, someone's negotiated a deal to buy a house and they're buying it, and they come in at the last minute while it's still open to change and offer $100,000 more. And it goes on all the time. We also have some barriers as a stand in the way of businesses who want to provide seasonal housing for employees. City of Seward is one of them. That they directly blocked the access to a piece of property that could have been used and was planned to have housing for employees built on it. They had their reasons for doing that, but that's what happened. So we're going through a very difficult situation in the fact that we have this environment that we have created that is not helping or is exasperating the situation. I don't know how to solve that part.
Yeah.
Because it's beautiful. People want to come here, they want to experience it, they want to have it for their summer vacation. Some people want to live year round, but then they run into that.
And I think something I just thought of too is as we're expanding our winter business with operations like JAG and Catalyst and the marine industries, we're kind of at this, in the summer we're full of restaurants and things to do and activities, and in the winter it's a little stagnant, but we still have those people who come in and are trying to live their life and be happy and work in that industry as well. So finding a way to kind of have both of those running at the same time, because I don't necessarily think adding, and this is not a great thing to say as a tourism director for the Seward Chamber of Commerce, but we have to diversify, and instead of focusing on winter tourism, diversify on all of the aspects that can create businesses in town year round. But making some of those businesses that make all their money in the summer be open a little bit longer, or expand and have avoid that stagnation that comes September 20th, October 1st on a good year. But I'm also, like I said, open to and excited to work with you on trying to find not necessarily a solution, but a way to become better. So do we have any ideas, thoughts? I know Linda had come in and talked about maybe having a conversation about worker retention and the different issues in a larger meeting for that's part of this issue, but how can we help?
I think what we'd like to do is, we've got these set up for the next 2 months, I think, through our meetings, maybe a little bit longer. And once we collect that information, I'm hoping we're going to get some solutions as well as identifying some specific problems, broader or maybe more focused than just housing in general.
Yeah.
I think once we've identified what those are, I think at that point in time, we can take all the information we've collected and make it something, because I mean, parts of this definitely have to come to the city council, but I think there's parts of it that we can take out to the community as well, and get the community talking about all of the hurdles that different employers are seeing. You know, putting on my personal business hat, we're a fish processing plant, and people think of us as seasonal, but that's not the model for our company. In every one of our other facilities, we pay a living wage, we do 401k, we do paid time off. We have people who make $70,000 to $80,000 a year, and they're working 12 months out of the year because we vertically integrated each of our facilities. We don't see the possibility for that here in Seward, and we want it because that's what we have everywhere else. But we're seeing the same thing. You know, how do we get, you know, we could employ 40 people 12 months out of the year if we had a place for them to live and a little bit more working space where we're trying to expand. So when we talk about, like Tara was saying, how families aren't coming because of the lack of housing. So our restaurant's not open because they're not getting enough business, and are they not getting enough business because we're not bringing families in? We need to get those things out. It's great that we're having the big kind of industry leaders coming in, but we need to get the information we learn out to small businesses, to landlords, to people like that, to understand the economic ramifications of the decisions that are being made. Go ahead.
Yeah, just, I want to make a few comments just real quick as it applies, and I have a meeting at 1, but we did receive a letter from the school superintendent. I actually spoke with them at the Cape Head Industry Outlook Forum, and he did sent a letter that basically, like, they want us to expand housing as much as possible, just because it is a problem for teachers. They have positions open at the school, which is kind of that trickle-down effect. If you don't have enough teachers in the school and you're not providing good services, people will not continue to stay here. And this is like when I moved here 12 years ago, we had trouble finding a house. Luckily, we found a place to rent. I was a school principal moving here, and we lived in a camper trailer in the summertime because we were asked to leave at the end of the season. And then we were able to buy a house, thankfully. But I was a school principal, and then in the years coming after that, I had a number of teachers, and this is over a decade ago, turn down positions because they could not find housing. And so I know right now for us as the city, it is our #1 priority, and we are pushing in that direction to take city properties where we can and make those into single-family homes, because our school populations have been in decline for a number of years, since I've been here. They were going down then. And that's important because if we get to that point, and we've gotten to that point where we start losing like programs and services within the schools, and we need to bring the school attendance back up so that we can bring back electives, and even like special services. We don't even have some of these things that we have to have people coming over from the district on a semi-regular basis because we've just gotten to that point where we don't have the numbers to justify it, although our need is still the same basically. And so anyway, the school district is very much in support of us for those two reasons, for teachers and for school enrollment. And so, yeah, but that is our #1 priority. But also, I would say that there are people in this community who do not believe that we have a housing issue.
What?
And
Say it again, please.
Yeah, there are people in the community who do not believe that we have a housing issue that warrants expanding housing. And I'm not joking, like we hear from these people and they're kind of loud at times, but and what we're going to do as the city is in early March, we're going to have kind of a listening session like we did with the marine industry. Right before COVID hit, we kind of had that listening session where we got people together and just like, we want to hear from you guys. And so we are going to be organizing a time. We're going to be in contact with the chamber so they can kind of push out to businesses. But I think it's good for all of us as a community because some people just aren't paying attention. for us as a community to understand that portion of our employee issue of our housing. And so we're going to have a listening session. We want to get inputs from businesses, from whatever, so that we can see the full picture. But I also think it's good for other people in the room to hear from each other as well. And so we are going to be pursuing that because we do really realize that as a city, that's kind of our number one jobs, is to do what we can to provide in that way, because it is becoming very inhibitive to economic growth and to just to sustaining industries in general.
Go ahead.
Wait for it.
My question is, has the city run out of land, reasonable land for these kinds of projects, or is there plenty of land?
We are, I would say the city has land, but not all of it is known to be suitable for housing. We are looking at, we do have land that's suitable for housing, or people that own lots, but then it's the money to get like utilities to that place, that's really big money. And a lot of the infrastructure grants that are coming are not providing utilities for
Expansion.
for utility expansion for housing. But we are basically kind of looking, there's not a piece of city property that we are not looking at right now for, like, can we do this here? That's why last week's city council meeting, we're looking at that SMIC bench area up there, that's city land. We have to know whether or not, can we put housing there? There's different areas within the city limits that we are looking, and the discussion is too, we actually have a lot of land that's not in city limits that we also need to take a look at, that we can't really do that, but it is part of the solution to our problem, because we have lands that are either being misused or not developed that are in the borough. And so that's also part of our problem, that we need to do what we can to be involved in, but we don't have a lot of jurisdiction there, obviously. So, but as far as the city-wise goes, we're doing inventories to find out every single piece of property that we can, is this suitable for housing or something that will promote?
I don't want to get shot for asking this, but is the word annexation anywhere in your conversations? Do we need to start looking outside the existing boundaries, or do we have our hands full already?
Well, I think we have our hands full right now, and that's just a whole other, you want to get things thrown at you. You mentioned that word, so.
Just like
I think that word comes up every year, I think, for certain reasons, whether because people don't like their money going to the borough only, or, or people would like them to be able to have a Seward police officer show up at their doorstep in 2 minutes instead of waiting for the troopers, if the troopers are all out somewhere else. Fire service area, it gets brought up, we hear it in different ways. And so that's...
But it's not actively part of the solution right now?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Okay. Jason, thank you. I think you are representing the administration, who, when Steve asked us several weeks ago to entertain this effort, I didn't think we were the only ones out there. And I think that, in fact, there's a lot of people that are looking at this, and I'm heartened to hear the efforts the administration's already taking. And I think that we could step back and say, well, each of us has a solution to this problem. It's housing, affordable housing, or, a winter skating rink, or more restaurants. It's still got to be researched. It's still got to be hashed out. And it's going to take a little bit of time. The housing issue is one about everybody wants it. Okay, there's a goal. You want housing. The real issue is how you get it. And the city is not going to build housing. And to be fair, I believe I understand who was talking about housing not being an issue. What they were talking about is a conversion of existing houses to removing them from the available real estate market, turning them into verbos or nightly, whatever they are. And that's what I think that particular, if we're talking about same individual, that's what, okay, well, that was one of the things that is out there. There's so many properties in Seward that are not available for purchase that used to be.
Does the chamber have that number of how many?
We would have that, I mean, we can look that up, you know, and I would say this is like, the housing problem is, there's never any like, oh, if we just flip the switch, it's gonna fix that. Like, do we have an issue that we need to look at with short-term rentals? Yes, we do need to examine to make sure that we are doing everything possible to make sure that code is being enforced, to make sure that things are being zoned correctly, so we're not hurting ourselves in that way. So I do think like, to acknowledge like that that there's an issue there, but that some things there that we can do better that we need to address for sure.
You're right, that's not enough. You can look at Girdwood, that had a public airing this last week about their shortage of housing. And, you know, I'm surprised it took that long for them to realize that.
Right.
But what they've done over there is taken the available land and built single-family homes. You know, I don't know if I mentioned this recently, but I was just in Seattle, and we drove over to Snoqualmie Falls and back, and a hillside where I used to hunt is lined with condo townhouses. I mean, the whole hillside is lined. So, I mean, there's 5,000 people living there. It's not impossible to imagine that here. I don't know if anybody wants it, but that may be what we have to face if we've got available jobs and no housing, and we want to continue the style of life. The only other option, quite frankly, is the bubble bursts, and your $600,000 house now is only worth $100,000 because there's no business.
And that's not good either, you know,
No,
and
it's
so,
not good.
but as far as the city, like, we are not in the land development business, we're gonna leave that to the land development professionals, but where we
I
have.
hope to have them in here myself.
Yeah, well, but if we have city land that makes sense, like, why don't we have housing there? That's what we're moving those lands to, where it's empty right now or not being used for that. That's our goal, is to turn the right pieces of property and turn that over to a developer to do their job, because they can do it as quickly as, way more quickly than we can.
Encouraging utility development. I know one builder has told me that they had a deal on the table at one time, and the revolving chair of city administration, that deal sort of went away. Maybe it could be looked at again.
Yep, and, yeah, we're actually like, in the process of, we just got another application for development reimbursement program. And so we're gonna continue to do that and try and keep that funded so that we can also promote it, for that direction as well, so.
The infrastructure bill, you said it doesn't have any capacity to address growth in this way? Okay.
No, it's unfortunate because the infrastructure bill, the way it came out, you would have thought that they're gonna be dropping like money off at City Hall or something like that. The way that was kind of like thrown out there, but really you start looking at it, and a lot of that funding is being used to replenish like loan stocks. And so you can get that, but what you have to do is just.
You got the 185 for the.
Which is amazing. That is
Fully
fantastic
funded.
and
I
huge,
know.
because then it puts that off of the plate, and then we can focus on other things. But
Right.
much of that infrastructure money is actually going to loans. And so it creates a loan capacity, so you can get a really, really low interest loan, but it's not grants, and they're not being used for the development of housing, so.
And it's a 5-year window, right, on this money?
As far as we know.
Okay, so there is the potential then where we could look at a loan to help bring electricity into the back end of Forest Acres, or?
Yeah, I mean, and really, and electricity is not the problem, it's water and sewer. That's like the $200 a foot. That is crazy expensive. So you know, it's $500,000 to go stretch a quarter of a mile or something like that. So it's like, that's where it gets really expensive.
And then expansion of the treatment center.
Right.
Yeah, that is where like and so we're looking at the Clean Water Act kind of stuff so that we can leverage that, where it makes sense to expand it. Anywhere we can move it for the excuse of, or not for the excuse, for the use of like an infrastructure piece that does make sense. What that does, that it actually buys infrastructure for housing at the same time, at least gets it closer.
Right.
So.
I know you had a deadline. Do you need to? That's why. Keep you.
Yeah. Any other?
Chair, I will have to return back to work if that's okay.
Yeah.
So, could I ask one more question for Kat here?
Yeah, for sure.
On these, I guess, topics here, there's a couple of them that we've reviewed before here. You know, the high utility bills, of course, freight costs, And I'm looking at this, like, there's a lot of stuff that this board and the council can act upon, but there's things like utility bills that we've already, you know, I mean, we could have a debate on that.
Yeah.
But they're not going to go
Yeah.
lower. Barring some spectacular innovation, and the same with freight and supplies, and we're seeing vendors go out of business in Anchorage and close their doors permanently, that have been with us. I think it was Frigid North that just did that? So are the local businesses, like thinking about that, like they're gonna have to incorporate, how do you open doors on a restaurant when you know that utility bills are gonna go up year after year and employment costs are gonna go up year after year?
Yeah, I think with the utility costs, specifically with restaurants too, that's part of the reason why they're not open year round. You know, they take that time when they're making tons of money, and then you can shut off and save money on utility bills. I think at this point, for the high freight costs and time and high utility bills, it's just worked into the way that they operate. It's more of an issue for businesses wanting to start up. Say, hey, I want to open a tanning salon, and then they realize, holy cow, I can't afford the electricity rates. So, yeah, and the tanning bed shipment to Seward. I don't know why I picked that example, but I'm going to stick with it.
Wishing for sun.
Yeah, I'm just wishing for some sun. So yeah, I think when you look at businesses that are already here, established and successful, it's because in part they plan for those utility bills increasing and the employee rates increasing. But when you look at somebody who moves to town and maybe wants to start a business in a year or two, or wants to open some sort of establishment, it is the issue of being faced with the reality of high freight costs and utility bills. So I would say that it is not a barrier to existing businesses, but a barrier to starting a business in Seward.
If I might, I hear this all the time about utility bills, and I pay them. I do not agree, based on the fact that I pay electrical utilities to 4 different utilities. And Seward is not the most expensive by far.
Yeah, I think it's part of the, it's always the most expensive because it's what you're paying.
Well, of course, one in front of
Like you're reading it and it's more expensive.
But that is the cost of business. And I know some of the heavy users of electricity, your facility, the ship lift, when they run, anytime they do anything over there, the Sea Life Center, they have a big burden with that. But their unit costs are comparable to other places in the state.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree.
Okay.
I'm just sharing the information that I collected, and I also think it's a big talking point too in the way of, oh, utility bills. So
it's a broad thing.
It's the downside to calling somebody and asking what their problem is. You get the big talking points, and I think the one that stands out isn't utility bills anymore, it's housing.
I don't understand how the rates are built, Kat. The gasoline in Fairbanks right now is cheaper than Anchorage.
Yeah, isn't that bonkers?
And Seward, of course, is always higher, but...
Yeah, I feel like Seward is just staying at $3.99 because nobody wants to put it at $4.
Well, I know the reason why that's happening, but never mind, I'm not gonna say that either.
I just want to piggyback on what Bruce was saying, because we have gone through the rates. And if you say utility bills, okay, but if you say electric, it's not accurate,
Yeah.
because the electric rates are actually quite reasonable. And the selling point of Seward is reliable power. Because if you think about what's going on down below, or any of these places where they've had wildfires or floods or all this stuff, power can take days to restore. And so it's really, I want to make sure everybody is using this as a selling point. Seward has reliable power. It's the only place I've ever lived where you can count on, I mean, unless there's something very bizarre, you can count on the power being back within an hour, sometimes within a half an hour. And that's not it getting fixed. That's them turning on the generators. Most places don't have that.
Yeah, and I definitely agree, and I think in bringing together this document and just the issues that people come forth with, I think it's also good to realize that they're not all, there are some issues in there that have been solved or addressed, and that's a conversation for both the chamber and city to start navigating, getting that message out there. Like, yes, hey, it could be worse, but in comparison, we're doing good.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that really, to me, that's a big selling point.
Okay, I thank you for your time,
Yeah,
this information. Oh,
It's not necessarily for Kat, but I guess just a thought that I have maybe for the board and for the city is, maybe there's a way to look at a rate adjustment or something for, and I understand that the rates are reasonable, but if there was some sort of rate adjustment that we could make in the winter for a business that wants to stay open, because, I mean, the city's losing out on their utility or their electric already because the restaurant's closing their doors and turning their electric off or turning everything down. So they're losing all the sales tax from any food that could be purchased. They're losing bed tax from people that could stay at hotels, you know, and we were talking about snow machiners coming to Seward. I'm a snow machiner, and I'm on a Facebook page, and I see these guys talking about it all the time about coming to Seward, and that they're just going to drive down for the day, not even come into Seward to get gas, because they're just going to turn around and go home because there's one restaurant open and they ate here last weekend and they don't want to, you know, go to the same place. So there's a lot of business that is certainly lost for the city. And I know I've had friends in the past that have owned restaurants or run restaurants, and it's hard for them to stay open because their electric bills are so high, because a lot of the buildings, I would say, are poorly insulated, built for summertime usage, and so it's hard to heat them, you know, so it's a choice. Some of them are snowbirds, they like to get out for the winter, but some would stay open, but they can't afford to. And I just wonder if there's something that we could do to
Madam Chair, if I might,
Before we go through that, I want to let you get on with
Oh,
your
I don't
stuff.
have, I'm planned to be here till 2,
Okay, thank you.
so I'm here,
Thank you
yeah,
for-
no worries.
Okay, go ahead.
one of the things that came out of the Evergreen, the recent forensic report,
Green.
the Green report, one of the things that came out of that is the city has a smorgasbord of special agreements. And it goes back for years and years, and they've been agreements to encourage a business to locate here or to stay in business, and all with good intention and well-reasoned. And their report is saying that it's both confusing and in some cases misapplied. So I suspect that the city is going to, and I can't speak for the council, but I suspect the city is going to look at that report and at some time try to modernize, update, and I think the kind of thing you're talking about, you're talking about a subsidy essentially. You know, should be on the table, considered, and the data would support it. You know, you recruit the guys that come down with a snow machine and a truck, they're driving $75,000 worth of investment down the road. They can afford a $15 hamburger. So, yeah, I think there is a place for it, and it may be a discussion that's going to come up.
And kind of jumping off of what Colby was suggesting, I wonder if perhaps a training program for retrofitting existing buildings to be more energy efficient might be something that we could sponsor, or I don't know. But I mean, it seems like that could be a way to engage the community in making their facilities more year-round capable.
I definitely agree, and I think that there's a lot of interest in that. Just figuring out, getting the right information to the right people is somewhere where I think the chamber can help as well. But I know a lot of people are interested in all of the different environmentally and more cost-effective heating and operating costs. So I think that's a great idea. And just facilitating that message and getting that information out there. I don't know how many times I've heard the word heat pump in the past 2 weeks, but definitely a good option. Yeah. But yeah.
Okay, any other discussion on this topic? Okay.
Great, and then just a side note for Bruce, my rent is about $900 a month with everything included, and that's a really good deal in town. So Yeah.
$900,000 is in the ring.
Sorry?
You said $900?
$900 a month, everything included, and that's a good deal in town.
That is
Yeah.
really good.
That's
So,
rented.
yeah, so if that, I think that is one that somebody could afford on a salary that may not be more towards like, I think for my position, I should probably be paying more, but don't tell anybody, don't tell my landlord that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, but I think that's an important thing to note. I know people have asked me multiple times what they should charge for rent, and it's always just a wild smorgasbord of whatever highest number you heard, add 50, so.
Well, the real problem is the fact that we are losing so much housing to seasonal occupation is because they can make more money on that seasonal rental than they can make on an annual rental.
I think we
Also
really
at
need
this-
to know what those numbers are, because I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
But I've never seen anything, and obviously, you know, there's this perception, but it would be really great to know
Yeah.
exactly how many of the houses in town are seasonal rentals.
Let me give
I'll
you a
also-
number right now. 17,000 on seasonal rental, 12,000 on the annual,
Yeah.
right there.
Also, at this point too, though, if we could use more seasonal rentals. I've gotten so many phone calls over the past week of people not being able to find a place to stay for the month of July. So we have a housing problem on both sides.
Yeah.
You know, if we continue to be beautiful, which I don't see, and an awesome place to stay, more people are gonna wanna come.
You gotta
But we
balance
have-
that
but yeah.
though, right?
Yeah.
Because you get too many
Yep.
tourists here and we'll just implode.
So I think we're at a good point right now of having that, that balance. Definitely not in the housing sector, but I think this past year was a hard one. This past summer was a hard one mentally for anybody in the tourism industry. And tipping that scale is great for the pockets, but maybe not the brain. But I think as we expand the houses, it's also important to realize that those give more opportunities for seasonal rentals. So just figuring out that correct way to navigate, because there's always going to be an increase in demand for seasonal rentals. There's one right now, so if I was to build a shack in my backyard, I could probably rent it out. But yeah, just an interesting way to think about it is that we're already full for July in seasonal rentals.
I thought we were gonna buy a little cabin and have it drug over for
Thanks again.
Yeah, no
Really
problem.
appreciate it.
I'm gonna go try and renew my license at the DMV now.
I did that last week, after the last
We
meeting.
are gonna have a real.
So the last specific topic on our list is to talk about the J1 and H2B visa program. And so I asked Brenda in the clerk's office to print out these two different handouts for you. The one that looks like this is one that I use in PowerPoints, and this is specifically H2B versus J1s. The other one is the J1 versus an H1B, which has a few differences. Mostly, the biggest difference is an H1B is agriculture specific and an H2B is non-agriculture. That's the biggest difference between the two. So most of what gets used in Alaska is the H2B for non-agricultural use. But before we go through these differences, I wanted to just tell you a little bit of the history behind both the J1 and the HB, not specifically the H2B. Actually, the oldest of the two is the HB visa. And that was a program that was started in 1952, and it was started as a way to bring immigrant workers into the U.S. So that actually predates the J1 program, which we've heard about more recently. So the J1 program was started in 1961, and it was started by Senator Fulbright. And it is, the legislation behind the J1 visa is actually what allows us to do international student exchange programs with high school kids and college kids. And that's where it really started in the 60s. It was meant to be a cultural exchange program. It was originally geared toward education, towards professors, teachers, students that were coming over to research. The idea was that we would exchange between countries and learn about culture, learn about difficulties and pros and cons of how different countries lived, and then go back to your country and take what you learned through that education, through that cultural exchange back. And that both countries would benefit from that exchange. That is what it was originally targeted toward. If you look at what was happening in our labor market in the 80s, we were starting to see a change in wages. The minimum wage was stagnant, especially towards the end of the 80s. We were also seeing a change, a shift in who was working. Vietnam vets, when they returned from the Vietnam War, a lot of them were going into some of those lower income jobs for whatever reason. We had college kids that were able to get seasonal work, and at the time seasonal work was paying enough that they could make good money during the summer. But as the wages stagnated, fewer and fewer college kids were going into those type of occupations. So employers saw this J1 program as a way to start bringing college kids over, because it was open to, you have to be a college student to be a J1. And so it wasn't very regulated. It had kind of fallen off everybody's radar, and more and more businesses started doing J1s, J1 visas, because they could keep their wage low. I think J1s in this country, especially for seasonal labor, artificially kept the minimum wage down because, in my experience, in the early 2000s, you could bring a person from Poland over, and $3,000 is a year's salary there. So if they could come here and make $8,000, that was 2.5 years' salary, and then they could go back. And so what was low to us was high to them, and so we were able to keep paying these lower wages. What happened in 2012 is a large group of J1 students at a factory in Hershey, Pennsylvania did a massive strike and walkout. And
As well they should have.
absolutely, I had issues with the J1 program being utilized the way it was by seasonal labor for years, because you would bring these people over, they could not leave. They could not go to another job. If they did leave, they could not come back into the country. Most of them lost their passports if they didn't finish out the term of their term here. And so people would bring them in and make them pay for housing, make them pay for food, and give them crazy hours that some of them want to work, but some of them didn't. So that big walkout in Pennsylvania caused a national focus to go back onto the J1 program and say, wait, this has gotten way out of hand and it's not what it was supposed to be. And so they went back to strictly enforcing the rules that you'll see of the J1 visa, and even adding some more. So anybody who uses a J1, there has to be a cultural component in the exchange. You have to guarantee 40 hours a week, you have to pay for 40 hours a week, you have to provide housing, and so there's some very strict rules now that you have to follow. So J1s can still be used, and they are still being used by a lot of the hotels down in the lower 48. A lot of the amusement parks, museums, things like that are building cultural components into their J1 program and continuing to use J1s. So when the J1 program stopped being accessible to everybody, they switched to these HB visas and looking at those. Originally, the HB visas were capped at $65,000 a year. Like I said, the H2B specifically program, the whole HB program was started in 1952. If you look back over the records, in 1987, only 62 visas were issued under the HB visa program, and it was capped at $66,000. By 2000, 45,000 of those visas were being issued. By 2017, there were 83,000 that were approved. And so in 2017, they did do a lift on the cap of those visas, but they still are hitting that cap every year. So when you're using the H-2B visa program now, you have to register with the federal government saying, I have these jobs, I cannot fill them domestically because I do not have, there's not people available in my area or whatever who can do this job. So you have to prove that, you have to get blessed by the US government, and then you can apply for how many of these visas that you want. Most people use an intermediary company or an attorney because it's very difficult to navigate. And there are 2 open periods. Both of them last about 14 days when you as a company can put in for how many H-2B visas you want. And they're usually all taken up before that 14-day period is over. So there was a special class of H-2B visas created thanks to Senator Murkowski, specifically to help like the fishing industry, and that's bringing Japanese road techs over. It's a little bit of a different program that was created specifically for that, just to ease that burden. But that's the big difference, is H-2B is specifically is non-agricultural work. They can stay longer, they can stay up to 10 months. A J1 is usually for 3 months. They've made it so that the J1s can't come back year after year. They can come back for as many years as they're a student, but once they graduate from being a student, they can no longer come back. And so with the H-2Bs, you can petition, they can stay for 3 years, 3 solid years, and then they have to go back to their country for a certain amount of time, so you can continue to use the same workers over and over. So it's a little bit better geared toward a lot of what we're doing, but it also comes with its own set of rules as far as you have to have the housing you're providing inspected, and you have to guarantee a number of hours for the time they're there, and things like that. So that's basically a little bit of the history and the difference between the two, because I'm sure they're going to come up over the next couple of months as we're talking with people about what they're doing for seasonal employment.
So just to clarify, in terms of the lodging J1s, you're not required to provide 40 hours, but you are required to provide whatever you commit to.
Right.
So in our case, we estimate 32 hours a week per student. I've actually never had a student take me to task over not meeting that, because typically what'll happen is you'll have a slow week and they won't make that number, then you'll have a heavy week and they'll make more than that number, and it all kind of balances out.
Yeah, if it adds up in the end to an average, then you're okay.
Yeah.
But if you were only working them 24 hours and that
for
was
the
every
whole
week,
summer,
and
yeah,
at the end
exactly.
those were the only hours, then they
Yeah.
could.
Yeah, that would be a problem. The other thing is that, like you said, the HB visas really require an intermediary to help with, and that tends to run around $6,000.
As a fee?
Yeah, a legal fee.
It's
It depends, but, you know.
it's a little bit less, the more people you bring, the less that cost is, because it's a capped cost. So if you're bringing, 50 people, but yeah, if
It
you only
becomes,
want
yeah,
one,
but if you
it's-
only want one, yeah, it's very expensive.
So are you using the HB or J1s?
Me?
Yeah.
J1.
So if I might, Madam Chair, I'm going to admit I'm pretty ignorant in this. I have a passport. I've been to Mexico and Canada and Japan, and that's it. So people coming into the country to visit need a visa, a passport and a visa, I
It
assume.
depends on the country they're coming from.
Okay, so
Some require visas and some don't.
so these 2 things here, 3 things, the H program and the J program, these are the equivalent of work permits.
Yes, it's a visa or a permit that's issued by our government that allows them to be here for a certain amount of time, engaging in work and getting money, following a set of rules. So it's different from visiting.
So there's a couple terms that I have heard and partly familiar with. One is a permanent foreign resident or something, and there's also a green card. How do those figure in?
So with these 2 programs specifically, the HB programs and the J1 programs, neither one of them will allow you to gather. So in order to move towards a green card or a permanent resident alien, there's another series of requirements that you have to meet.
Beyond this, so this is the entry.
These aren't even entry for those. So if you're interested in becoming a green card resident or a permanent resident alien, you have to go through a whole different program.
Okay.
Neither of these will allow you to check off like for your green card, there's a residence, you have to have lived here for so much time, and you have to be sponsored by a company, and neither of these, so if you're here for 2 years as an H-2B, those 2 years do not count towards your residency requirement to obtain a green card. You have to go through a different government program in order to be moving towards your green card.
But these people are coming for these specific reasons, either because they really want to sample the culture, or there's a wage discrepancy, and they can do pretty well.
That's usually, it's the wage discrepancy, that's why they come.
In the workforce, unless you're going to, like I said, when you talk about the people that are coming down, it's used by a lot of universities to exchange teachers. So if you want to come in and teach in the US for a semester, and you're a resident of, Spain or Portugal or wherever, you can do it through this J1 program, which allows you to get paid. Otherwise, you can't come and work.
Or to work for Sea Life Center.
Yeah. So universities are using it as a way to do cultural exchanges and with students, with faculty and things like that. Museums use it a lot, but when we're talking about the tourism industry and retail, then it's wages.
So if I might continue, except for the abuses that you mentioned earlier, which I will research a little bit because I like Hershey, Pennsylvania, but except for those abuses, the program works pretty well as it's intended. So
Now
the last 2 years with COVID, there was some shutdown in international travel, but there was also some political backlash, I thought.
I'm not, I don't.
There were people who don't like the aliens coming in and taking American jobs.
Of course, and that's why for the J1s is a cultural exchange, so technically they're not supposed to be taking a US job, but with the HB programs, you have to show that you cannot hire enough local people, or you have to say, this position takes this skill and it's not available locally.
Okay.
And so you have to, and there's a certain portion with the H-2B program. So if I have 40 employees, I have to fill at least, and I don't remember the exact number, but there's a certain percentage of my employees that have to be filled with US workers. I can't hire my entire workforce as H-2Bs. I can't say I employ 40 people and all 40 of them are going to be H-2Bs.
Okay. So to our immediate problem, some of these have provide housing and some of them don't.
So once again, with the H-2B program, we're required to provide housing. Also with the H-2B program, you'll be interested to know is the state of Alaska sets the minimum wage for the H-2B workers that come in, and they look at what you're hiring them to do, and they look at what the median income is. They look at minimum wage, and I'm not sure what the state minimum wage is right now, being new to Alaska, but or back here. But for our H-2B visas this year, the state of Alaska is setting the minimum wage for them at $15.35 an hour. And so that sets your minimum wage because now you have to pay everybody the minimum of that. So
I think it's $8.35.
yeah,
so
everybody who's using H-2Bs, everybody that they employ has to be paid at whatever that rate is. And so, like, that's why you'll see in the seafood industry, at least starting wages this year are going to be $15.80 about.
So do these workers that come in have any other expectations besides food and housing? I assume you're talking about as far as access to community activities or anything like that?
I think that for the most part, I think more so with the H-2, well, the J-1 visa, like I said, is a cultural exchange, so there has to be those components built into it. With the H-2Bs, they really are interested in making money, and so I think it depends on the company they're working for. It is about finances with H-2B, and usually they're coming from a country that has, that isn't making as much money as we are, and so it just depends. The ones that, the places where I'm familiar with it, the people that come on an H-2B visa want to be assimilated into the community. A lot of times they will come as a husband and a wife or a family unit. They'll apply for the program together to go and all work at one place together as a family unit as often as single people. So there is a request for that when it can be provided. But, you know, like for seafood companies in Seward, we can't house a family. And so we don't bring families up because we don't have any place to put a family, and we don't want to separate a husband and a wife into, we have male and female housing and things like that. And so it creates it's a little bit harder.
Well, Hershey, Pennsylvania wasn't the only place that was abusing them. They were being abused here in Seward as well.
Oh, the seafood industry was horrible with them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you'd get a bunch of J1s and they'd stick them all in one room, and they're, you know, the bathroom might be an outhouse. I mean, it was really, people were not treating them well at all. So I'm glad that that all got revised, because...
Well, Board Member Paquette, my interest will be how and why that particular group of workers had enough chutzpah to stand up and say enough.
Somebody coached them, I'm sure.
Well, maybe, maybe not. Very interesting
So
stuff.
that's our, so we got a little bit of time left here. The one thing that I wanted to talk about, it's January, we have some new members. I guess I'm the only new member. I just thought, thank you. I thought it'd be good to take a little bit of time, and I think you should do this maybe every year, every couple of years, and just talk about the format of our meetings and just see if anybody has any questions. Speaking with Brenda, we do have some flexibility in time of day, number of meetings, how we structure our meeting. There's a little bit of flexibility in those things, and so I just thought it would be good to just see if this works for everybody. You know, sometimes doing the same thing over and over without making sure it works for everybody isn't always the best thing to do. So just to check in for time. Does time work? Does day of the week work? Anybody have any suggestions?
My suggestion, as Brenda and you both know, my suggestion, because we're short-seated, is to try and be more productive. So at the next meeting, there's a draft resolution that will talk about allowing some telephonic attendance to count. So, for example, that meeting that we had to skip because Colby was quarantining, we could have met and we would have had a quorum. So I sponsoring that and bringing it forward for next meeting's discussion. I would like to suggest as well that it specifies in code that we meet twice a month, but it doesn't specify what kind of meetings. And so we've kind of gotten in this habit of having a meeting and then a work session, which is fine, except that at these work sessions, we can't take any action. And so I'm looking for a way to make the second meeting of the month be in a format that we could actually take action at. And so, you know, if we were to have done that today, it would have been a meeting, and then we would have either had to have suspended the rules, or I don't know how else we could have accomplished this today. There is the idea, you know, there's the special meeting with a committee of the whole. I don't know if it makes sense to have every work session turned into a special meeting with a committee of the whole. I would just like to get feedback and discuss it.
Chairperson, I have a question of the clerk. Okay, we understand that if you participate telephonically in a PACAB regular meeting, that you really are only an observer. How do we change that?
With this resolution?
With the resolution?
Well, there is a resolution that Vice Chair Paquette submitted, and you will see it at the next meeting for consideration.
Okay.
And it will set the rules, it proposes rules to say, you know, you can attend telephonically under these circumstances for this many times.
Yeah, because I did participate in the one remotely, and I could have done the other one, but it seemed, Not really productive if I can't participate.
And if we approve that resolution, it still has to go to council,
Also, yes.
correct?
Well, yes, because right now this body operates under council rules.
Yeah.
So that would be a deviation from that.
And do all entities like this in Seward operate under those rules?
All the commissions operate under council rules.
So do they have to change council rules in order to change it for us, or can it be changed for us without changing council rules?
The latter, council could potentially approve special exemption for PACAB.
For council, for advisory boards, yeah.
Or they could just choose to do it for everyone.
Okay. So I look forward to seeing that. So
All right.
no, go ahead.
Okay, well, I think it's refreshing, I appreciate your willingness to take a look at procedures. Sometimes it's just habit that makes you continue, but sometimes procedures are in place for a good reason. So just arbitrarily or a change, I could go with the flow, frankly. I drive in from out of town, I enjoy the participation, but I think it's important that, remember, we're an advisory board to the city council, and it's really what they want from us. So we can make some decisions for ourselves, but we really should ask council what they want us to do.
Well, I think that, I mean, we're going to talk about this next week apparently, but I'm totally in favor of this telephonic Zoom, whatever it might be thing, because we take a, 4-month, 5-month hiatus in the middle of the summer while we're all busy. Three months. And in the off-season, when we're not as busy, some of us who work in seasonal businesses leave. And I would like to be able to participate while I'm not here in town, but over the years I've had to miss meetings, and so I think it would be great. As far as Wednesdays at noon, that's what I've been doing for the last however many years, so it's kind of habit now, and it works good for me. There are times when I have to leave at 1 instead of 2, but I think that everybody has those situations, so I think, as for me anyway, this the way it's set up now works fine for me.
Great.
Yeah, I actually would support any resolution that would allow me to participate telephonically if I'm absent because of whatever reasons, because in our day and age, we have that ability. But I do like the Wednesday format as we have it, because I can't go halibut fishing on Wednesdays.
Okay, that's great. I too will support the resolution. When I was on the Borough Assembly, there were quite a few times when I participated telephonically, and it's harder to be part of the discussion, which is what you give up when you're not here, but you can ask the chair for permission to speak, and you get to vote and be heard. And I know I've spoken about it with a few city employees and some council people, and the one thing that I did hear is the concern that it would allow somebody who was only here for part of the year, who was a snowbird, who only lived here 3 months out of the year. And I think that, I haven't seen the resolution yet, but I think we're addressing that in the resolution. So.
Yeah, I think the way it's crafted,
so we'll look at that next week.
It'll protect against that.
And then, like I said, I just wanted to throw out the meeting question because, I think it's good to check in with everybody once a year and make sure that what we're doing is still working. So Linda has brought up the thing about maybe changing our meetings from a work session and a meeting. I see the value in being able to, if something were to come up, to be able to respond to it immediately, but also, like today was really great. I would have not wanted to lose any of the time we had for discussion today, because we would have to, if every meeting was an actual meeting, we would have to go through the whole agenda, we would have to go into a meeting of the whole, and we'd have to come back out. And we also have to be cognizant of the extra work that would be put on staff if every single time it was an actual meeting with the agenda and the minutes and things like that. So I think it's worth continuing to discuss. And maybe what we do is at that annual, at our meeting where we set our agenda, and hopefully we can be, maybe we can look at it again in the middle of the year or something, where we look at what we've assigned to the work sessions and what we've assigned to the meetings and see if that makes sense. I think we can look at what's coming up in the future and say, hey, we didn't get through all this time, let's change next, because we can do that at any time. We can change the work session for the next meeting from a work session to a meeting if we feel like there's stuff that hasn't been addressed or stuff that we need to address. So I think it's an important thing to keep in mind that we can make that change as we need to. And just continue to be open about what's working for everybody and not working.
It doesn't also have to be all or nothing, because on your work session days, if you had the need to have a special meeting, you could have the special meeting first, adjourn it, and then go into your work session.
Okay.
So that's always an option available to you as well.
Do you have to advertise that?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
but,
Yeah, it has to be done just like a regular meeting, but if we were,
Yeah,
it's good
but-
to know that we could, if we had something that was gonna take 15 minutes, like the P and Z special meeting,
If we know we want to take action on something and not have to wait till the next,
not wait a month, then
Yeah,
we could
exactly,
do it that
yeah,
way.
yeah.
So I will make a note to myself to, at the end of our meetings, to just kind of assess, is there anything here that hasn't finished or that we need to deal with in the next 2 weeks?
Sounds good, yeah.
And I'll just make myself a note at the end of every meeting to just check in, see if we need to add something to the upcoming work session that makes sense. That sounds great. Does anybody have anything else they want to?
Yeah, I do. I was just seeing some correspondence between the clerk and some of our invitees, and I think the clerk has asked for some input in possibly how to schedule this. I would just offer that one of the things I was thinking about trying to do is pair compatible speakers, and I noticed that we had Tara today, which is a great kickoff. I mean, that really was nice, but if in the future you want to think about pairing, I'd certainly have some ideas on that. I think you saw the list of people I've talked to, and yeah, I'm sorry, I still call it Seward Fish, whatever their official name is.
I know.
Yeah, but someone from that, not because the chair can't speak for that industry, but an independent or a non-board person. I saw there was a conversation with the Department of Corrections at Spring Creek. They are a major employer. They definitely have an insight into this problem, but overall, it doesn't. I don't think any one person should control this. The chair may have a better view on who's available, but I would definitely think we want to involve people from as many levels, the hospitality industry, the housing industry, and the builders. Talking to, for instance, specifically Larry Harmon as a builder will give an insight into construction problems. Construction problems are driven by employees often, money and employees. And I have talked to trade union people, representatives, as far as how they can provide and how they see labor provided into the area. Large builders like Hall Custom House Builders in the Central Peninsula, or Spinelli in Anchorage, could also offer some insight, because ultimately the solution to a housing shortage is more housing. So how do you get there?
I will just say that I don't know if we'll have time to bring him in, but at Rotary yesterday, the speaker was the new superintendent for Spring Creek, and he said that they currently have 28 openings that they cannot fill. 28 full-time, well-paid openings and he just came over from Wildwood, and he said it's not, Wildwood is completely staffed, and and there's no place for anybody to live.
So I've been making calls to reach out to people who I've had contact information for on that list. And February 2nd, we have Kathy LeCompte coming from AvTech. March 2nd, we have Jenna Peterson coming from Seward Real Estate. And Larry Harmon is not available for the next couple of months to attend. So I could ask Phil Zimmerman, since he's doing the Gateway project. And then I'll just, I mean, as far as pairing at this point, I'll take any direction that you have, but I'm just dialing for dollars to see
I was gonna
who's
say,
available.
I think with schedules the way they are, it'd be great if we could, but we also need to.
You know, I just need to get a little more contact information for.
I'll get that to you.
those
Thank
folks.
you.
So,
I will say that OBI just hired a new general manager, a new plant manager, and I don't think that person's gonna be here until March.
is Brian,
Brian's been promoted and he is now over South Central for OBI.
okay,
But the new employee is a former Seward resident who owns property already, a rental home, and a home that he rents out now and is coming back to Seward.
okay. So not available for a little bit?
Not until April, I think.
Okay.
If I might, Chair, one of the interesting things I did find out, I called it the Forest Service, and you may know that Francisco Sanchez has retired. The new interim forester or forest ranger is Ruth D'Amico, who is a returning local resident who went out and improved her career and came back as the head. They have an interesting structure. They have their own housing. They used to be, located, their office was in Seward, and they staffed from temporary housing and whatnot, but in Crown Point, they did build housing for their staff. I thought that might be an interesting insight into what some organizations do.
Bornstein bought a house for, just for the purpose of, we bought the Hoagland's old house, and we're using it as housing for our main managers that we're bringing in so that we can offer them housing while they look for something locally. And then there's a couple of rooms that we're using, like hotel rooms for corporate people when they come in the summer and hotels aren't available.
Is that like a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom?
It's a 3-bedroom ranch with 2 bedrooms over the garage and a B&B attached. And
That's the one on Salmon Creek?
no, it's in Forest Acres. And I live in the B&B section.
Oh, I know which one, I know which one. it
And then
is.
the rest of it's being used for our senior management people.
Well, that's innovative, I agree. It's not long-term.
No, and it doesn't help with our 40 employees that we're gonna need by
Right.
summertime. But it does.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. The day of our next meeting is February 2nd?
Second.
February 2nd. So, see you all then.
Thank you.
What does OBI stand for? Ocean?
Nice name tag.